Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Gonna Go for Hour podcast. My name is Callaghan-Croley, publisher at Gophers Nation of the On3 Network, covering everything Minnesota. I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Tony Liebert of Bring Me the News. We're not gonna, beat around the bush on this one, Tony. Gophers come out on Saturday in Iowa City, and they get their butts kicked for 4 quarters. Definitely a performance that I don't think any of us saw coming, and one that, I think you put it best on Twitter earlier today. This is a game that, ramifications come from performances like this.
Yeah, 100%. I was just kind of thinking today because it really was one of those losses that takes a while to, I guess, grasp because it wasn't something that really anyone saw coming. It is one thing to think that the Gophers weren't going to have success in this game, but I don't think anyone expected them to get blown out and dominated as much as they did. I mean, you look at the Gophers under PJ Fleck, and we'll get into bigger picture stuff, but I think when the program and PJ himself lean so much into his record against bowl games and that they've won 6 in a row or whatever, I think any realistic Gophers fan cares about success against Iowa, which is one of their two rivals, way more than the Mayo Bowl or the Quickland Bowl. So,
Right, and we talked
it
about
just
that in the preview.
yeah, a game like this that it's always one of the two biggest regular season games of the year for Gophers fans. They want to have success against their rivals, and that's for any college football fan. So the wins count twice as much, and the losses, I think, hurt you twice as hard. And when you put a performance like that we can get into it a little more, but I think it's the second worst loss of the PJ Fleck era. I mean, it's really hard to say it's worse than losing at home as a 30-point favorite to Bowling Green, but losing the way they did, in the fashion they did, in the context that they did, it's just the type of loss that should result in changes.
Yeah, this is the type of loss that everybody within the football program needs to look themselves in the mirror, and they need to own it. This is, I think you said it best. But yeah, everybody in that building needs to own this loss today, because if you come out and lose that game like you have in the past in a tight scoring game, it comes down to the last drive, a last second field goal, so be it. I mean, Gophers fans are obviously going to still hate the result, but you weren't embarrassed. But this is a game where the Gophers looked woefully unprepared. I mean, we'll talk about it in a minute here, but this game was over before the end of the first quarter. On that pick six from Drake Lindsay to put the Hawkeyes up 17-0. That was the game. That was the moment the game was over. I mean, technically, you can point to the opening drive touchdown, since the Gophers only scored 3 points in this one, but it felt like they had a chance before that pick six, and then once that pick six happened, that was the game. They couldn't go down more than 14 points early and have a chance to win this game. But yeah, I agree. Everybody in the building just uh, needs to take this one. And let's not also forget that, and we both talked about it on our respective sites. This week, was a popular week for PJ Fleck's name to be out there, courtesy of his agent or whomever. Pete Nako's of On3 reported that he was, a name to watch in that Arkansas opening, this coaching carousel. And then the guys over at Football Scoops reported that he was going to be a popular name in the coaching carousel this year as well. And I think there's a possibility of both of those still being the case. One game, even though it was a terrible loss, does not change that. But it you let's be honest about those type of things. Those are put out there by agents to get their to get leverage for their clients, whether it's a raise or more resources at their new program. To have those type of reports out there and then come out and you lay an egg in the biggest game of your season, it's not going to sit right with Minnesota fans, and it shouldn't. And it just, it's not like this is year 1, 2, or 3 for PJ Fleck. This is year 9. This is one of those, we talked about it in the preview. Wisconsin and Iowa are the two programs that, if you're with the Minnesota program or a fan of the Minnesota program, is what you truly compare the program to. Minnesota fans I think everybody's pretty realistic. They're not going to, barring a Kirk Cignetti like hire and rocket ship to the moon, Minnesota is not going to be with the Ohio States and Oregons of the world consistently. Maybe it is definitely, an off chance on a really good season. But um, at the end of the day, you compare yourself to Wisconsin and Iowa. We talked about it. They surpassed Wisconsin, but this was a big opportunity for them to see if they could match up to Iowa. And they just came out and laid the biggest egg of, you know, considering that it's a rival, I would say it's the worst loss of the PJ Fleck era.
Yeah, I'm. You said it at the start of your point. The thing that I just really can't wrap my head around is how unprepared they
Yeah.
looked. And PJ Fleck has played Iowa 8 times before this game, and he knows what it takes to win this type of matchup. And Kirk Ferentz has been there the whole time. Like, they've coached against each other this many times, and they got blown out last year at home. I was just expecting a much more competitive game, and
Yeah.
it looked like the Gophers had no idea what they were doing.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
obviously that has a lot to do with the interception and the punt return,
Yeah.
make the scoreboard look a little bit bigger than what it was. But those are the types of plays that an unprepared team makes, and a team that lets the moment get to them. And they looked lost, they looked confused, they didn't even, like, practice all week. It was a baffling performance.
It looked like a team that bought in, and hype may not be the right word because it's not like everybody was all over them nationally for the win last week, but it looked like
Yeah.
a team that bought into their own hype after beating a top 25 Nebraska team.
Yeah, and, I mean, you can look at reasons why for that all you want, but it just when you're at one program for 9 years, you should be able to know how to handle that and how to, reel your team in and be like, "Hey, we had this big win, but this game's bigger than the one we just won." So, preaches the 1-0 season, and for Minnesota, I think if you really look at it bigger, the true season, so to speak, is it's like a 1-0 season against Iowa, 1-0 season against Wisconsin, and then it's almost like the rest of the year is won. If that's the way that Minnesota's judged, it's the success against your rivals. And when you're a program of their stature, when you're not judged by getting to the Big Ten championship or getting to the college football playoff, you have to show up in these games, and they just did not show up.
Yeah.
I still just don't really get it. I do think it's kinda crazy how Iowa wasn't ranked in the AP poll today. I do think they're a top 20 caliber
The-
team, and
I think they have a chance to make the college football playoffs.
I totally agree. I think they have as good of an argument as anyone to be that 4th best team in the Big Ten, which I think will get you into the college football playoff this year. And, like, Iowa, okay, they are a good team, but that's no excuse for getting humiliated against your rival on national TV. Think you're muted.
Oops. I think Iowa, of course, doesn't, at the very least, does cannot get blown out by Oregon in their next game. But yeah, that's a, let's not act like this isn't a good Iowa team, and you weren't, but obviously this is a very good Iowa team. This is a team that you and I probably underestimated a little bit coming into this game. Though at the same time, I think what a lot of PJ Fleck said last night after the game is also the truth. Like, yes, that is a very good Iowa team, but at the same time, Minnesota never gave themselves a chance to win that game. And I think part of it yesterday early was it just snowballed out of control in those first 25 minutes of action. And there was no chance for them to come back once it started snowballing. And the other thing with Iowa is you mentioned it, he knows what it takes to beat Iowa. And at the same time, Iowa is the same team they've been for the last 25 years under Kirk Ferentz. They do the same things the same way every week. They're not going to throw the ball a ton. They're going to run the ball 35 to 45 times a game, and they're just going to physical you in the trenches. And that's what they did for all 4 quarters yesterday. And I mean, I think part of the thing for me yesterday was that not only did Iowa out physical Minnesota, but Iowa just looked faster throughout the game than the Gophers. And Iowa's not necessarily a program that, out athletes many other programs at the Power
Yeah.
Four level. And that's for the Gophers and Fleck, that obviously comes down to recruiting, but also it's you look at the struggles in the trenches now for the last few years, especially on the offensive side of the ball. You look at the lack of speed in some areas. That comes partially down to also strength and conditioning, where I think at this point it's something that has to be looked at much deeper going forward. I know the Gophers have had some really great freak athletes over the PJ Fleck era. Malik Broggin's one of them, but it's hard to win when you only have one or two of those guys. You need everybody to, be taking steps forward in the strength and conditioning department. And I think that's something that Iowa does a really good job at excelling at year in and year out. They take, these underrated. It's not like Iowa recruits that much better than Minnesota, if at all. But I think Iowa just does such a great job in the strength and conditioning department. And that's where I think might be one of the biggest differences right now between these two programs. I'm not sure if you agree.
Yeah, it's interesting to look back at that game because if that pick six didn't happen, let's say even the Gophers put together a long drive and give their defense a little bit of rest, maybe we're looking at a different game in terms of maybe they fight back and at least make it a little competitive. But the fact that that pick six happened and then the game almost did feel over after that, I think that's where the criticism comes a little bit
Yeah.
because if you're year 9 at one place, you should know as a head coach how to handle that situation. And it
Yeah.
looks like PJ Fleck did not know what to do. And that was concerning and alarming. But I agree with you. It's even Minnesota roster wise this year might have the most athletes that they've
Yeah.
ever had in
Yeah.
terms of
It's not like
Anthony
that.
Smith. Yeah.
It's not like the athleticism isn't there.
Yeah. I mean, Anthony Smith is a future pro. Darius Taylor, when healthy, which is a whole nother discussion too, how he just it's hard to, I guess, criticize an athlete for having injury issues because it
Yeah.
is just luck of the draw at the end of the day. But it really has hurt this team when your best offensive player struggles with staying healthy because Minnesota is not deep as Ohio State or Georgia, and they can't just throw out another all conference level running back. So
Yeah.
they have the athletes with Anthony Smith, Darius Taylor, Coy Parrish, Kerry Brown. These are guys that have NFL potential at all levels of the field, and in the trenches might be the issue. But
Yeah. I agree.
to put that effort together against a roster that is not drastically better than you, like the performance against Iowa it looked the same as the Ohio State game, which is what's baffling because Iowa's not Ohio State and playing at Kinnick Stadium's a lot. It's a tough environment to play in, and PJ Fleck was talking about that how he considered it the toughest, but it's something you do every other year at Minnesota. So there becomes a point where you need to show improvements in those moments,
Yeah.
and that 2023 win is just looking more and more like an anomaly rather than a start of a trend.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about the actual how this game transpired, but it also feels like, and some of it is reactionary as with all losses, but this is also the type of loss that when you're this deep into a tenure, it can create a sense of hopelessness within a fan base, or the fan base losing uh, faith in the current leadership of the program. I'm not sitting here saying PJ Fleck needs to be fired, but at the end of the day, sports and college sports included, uh, the what teams are and programs are actually selling is the idea of hope, not necessarily winning. It's just fans show up when they have hope that a team can be good. They have a hope a team can be something more than they've been in the past. I feel like a lot of Gophers fans, especially with how this season's transpired to a degree, are beginning to kind of lose that hope that, there is another step here, that this is just where the program is. And I think to their credit, they look around the Big Ten. They see what Brett Bielema has done since taking over at Illinois. Not as if that has always been a bad program, but it was in a tough spot when he took it over. They've been consistently good since he got there. And then obviously you have Indiana and Kurt Signetti. Now there's only one Kurt Signetti. What's happened in Indiana may be a once in a generation type ascendant for a program,
Yeah.
but I definitely think this is a loss that could create more ire and a loss of hope in the fan base because we talked about it. It's the Wisconsin game and the Iowa game that matter more than anything else. And while the Gophers may go 8-4 this year, and that could include a win over Wisconsin, a lot of fans are still going to look back and be like, "Yeah, but we got our butt kicked against Iowa," and they're also going to look at that butt kicking from Iowa State, and they're going to look at that game at Cal, and if they go 8-4 and look well doing it, it's just going to create more ire because there was the potential for more. I think you make the argument out of the outside 2019 team that this may be uh, maybe PJ Fleck's most talented team as well so far, and it does feel like a potential lost opportunity, even if they go 8-4. Not that the college football playoffs were on the schedule, but you at least expected more than getting blown out by the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll talk about it more, and you mentioned the Arkansas opening, but it's just there's not many scenarios where a coach stays at one place for 20 years despite without winning Big Ten championships
Yes.
or getting to the playoff.
Yes.
And we just saw Iowa, which is probably the only program where you can point to where that's really happened since 2000, let's say, where a coach has stayed at one place without winning those Big Ten titles. But Kirk Ferentz and Iowa at least made a trip to the Big Ten championship a couple times when it was still division versus division. But there just becomes a point where PJ Fleck's going to look at it, the Gophers administration's going to look at it and say, did we just get this as far as it goes? Games like this, it's just those are the games you're going to look at because I mentioned it earlier. The bowl games are great, whatever, but it's just fans see. I think you said it very well with the hope thing because they want the bragging rights against their friend at work who went to Iowa, and they want to say, "Hey, we beat you guys this year," and they don't want to
Yes.
hear it over and over and over again that Iowa just bullies Minnesota every year because those are games that matter and the results that matter, and it's going to be an interesting end of the season because the Gophers have opened now about 4.5-point favorites against Michigan State, but the other three games are not a gimme. As much of the dumps Wisconsin seems to be in, they're always going to give Minnesota a tough game.
And they played really tough against obviously a. I'm not sure Oregon's a national championship contender, but Oregon's going to the playoffs, barring some sort of surprise here. And yeah, Wisconsin played them really tough last night. When before that, Wisconsin looked like they had no interest in playing football this season. So it'll be interesting to see how. I will say, I think the Gophers should win 3 of their last 4 games on paper, but um, based off the up and down performance we've seen from the team, even in wins, nothing is a gimme going forward this season. And you go back to kind of hitting that plateau. Obviously, very different levels to this, but I think back to, I covered Penn State for a while, and very different levels, but it feels a lot like the James Franklin situation with Penn State. Obviously, Penn State was winning 10, 11 games a year. They made the college football playoffs. They had national championship aspirations. So again, different levels. But Penn State loses to Oregon this year. That was probably the true nail in the coffin for James Franklin, just because that loss made those who follow the Penn State program, made them realize this year isn't going to be the year. And if Penn State failed to make it deep in the playoffs this year, James Franklin was going to be gone. It was probably going to be a mutual split at that point. But the program had obviously reached a plateau sometime recently, even though they were just in the semifinals. And it was just a time for Penn State to try something new. They realized they couldn't get to that next level with James Franklin. Now, the question is for the Minnesota administration is what is the goal here? What is their ultimate goal? Are they okay being what this program is under PJ Fleck? A consistently competitive Big Ten program who's going to win 6 to 8 games a year with the potential 9 or 10 win season, let's say once every 5, 6 years. Obviously, it's been a while since they've done that, but uh, I still think there's the potential to do that in the modern era every couple of years to this program. Or do you look at what other programs have done, like Indiana, and say, why can't we aspire to be more? Now, part of that is admittedly resources. Indiana, I don't think people realize it, but Indiana has a ton of money and resources to use to go with Kirk Cignetti. And I wrote about that this week with PJ Fleck. Is ultimately this is going to come down to PJ's long-term fit in Minnesota is kind of going to probably come down to how much more resources Minnesota's willing to give to him in the long term. Because if he thinks that he has hit a plateau here, then maybe that's the time that he decides to move on. Maybe he just maybe he's cool with what the program is and he's fine being this going forward and hoping for more. I'd be very interested to know what Mark Coyle's realistic ceiling he has in mind for the program. Like, is this what he imagines it? If so, it's going to be a happy marriage for a while. But I think it's an interesting conversation to have as we sit here halfway through year 9. Year 10 is on the horizon. It's a long time in college football to be in one place. And like you said, a lot of coaches don't stay in one place forever unless you're Kirk Ferentz. And Kirk Ferentz, let's be honest, is also the last of a dying breed of head coach.
100%.
So after he retires, outside of 1 or 2 instances, there's not going to be many coaches that stick in one place forever like they used to.
Yeah, because it's a really interesting conversation because it's one thing to think that Minnesota's hit a plateau of 7 or 8 wins every year, but it's another thing that fans care about beating Iowa, and you have to figure out
Right.
how to beat Iowa. And maybe PJ Fleck can. That 2023 year, the way that game ended, it just really seeming that it was just really lucky. And
Which
it,
also reminds me a lot of Penn State and James Franklin, because what's the game that Penn State compares themselves to every year? Ohio State. He beats
yeah,
Ohio State one year with a fluke play and never could beat Ohio State again. Uh, and I hate to call any single win a fluke, but when you have 9 years of data and only one of those data points is in your favor, it leans more towards being a fluke than not reality, but you know what I'm
like
saying.
a trend. Yeah.
Yeah, if they would have beat Iowa this year, it would have maybe leaned towards more being a trend. But instead, since that win, you've now been blown out by Iowa twice, which is a trend going the opposite direction.
Yeah, I agree. Again, it would have even been a different discussion if this game was competitive, but it
Yeah.
just wasn't even competitive.
And that's
And
the biggest sin of the loss for PJ.
100%. And yeah, because it's just an interesting conversation because of the fact that you just have to beat Iowa. You can't go in and just consistently lose to a program that doesn't have, because if you consistently lose to Ohio State, you can say, yeah, they have $100 million more than we do in our athletic
Right.
department, and their athletic department just operates at a different level, and fans realize that because that's just how it works. But Iowa doesn't, and there's no reason to consistently get bullied every single time against your rival. And I really agree with what you said, that it just over time you just lose hope. And college football is often judged for a program like Minnesota on a week-to-week basis,
Yeah.
and each game is kind of its own entity, especially when it's against a rival. And having this level of success against one of your biggest rivals has to mean something.
Right. And we'll move on after I got my last point. We can. Yeah, I want to hear what your thoughts on it are, and then we'll move a little bit more into the game for a little bit. I know nobody really wants to hear the game. I think our conversation today was much more about the ramifications and just the overall thoughts coming out of the loss like this. But and let's make it clear that we're not sitting here saying that PJ Fleck needs to be fired for this type of performance. At the end of the
Not
day,
at all.
Minnesota is still going to have a great chance to win 7, if not 8 games. That's a great year for the Gophers based off historic, what this program has been. And that 8 wins would be, a second straight year of 8 wins. It would be the fourth time in 5 years that they won 8 or more games, including a bowl game. That is, I mean, and it's part of, being obviously I'm not a fan, but it's part of where fans come from. It is to a degree easy to forget perhaps where you came from, right? Because if you told a Minnesota fan back in 2010, 2011, that, hey, we're going to hire a head coach in 2017, and after that, he's going to have an 11-win season, 2 9-win seasons, and maybe 2 8-win seasons after that. Minnesota fans would have signed right up for that every day of the week. But at the same time, it's while the program is absolutely doing really well. I posted a stat about it this week. Since 2021, Minnesota has the 7 most wins in the Big Ten. 5 of the 6 teams ahead of them have made the college football playoffs, have a ton of more resources, and the only other program is Iowa. I mean, there's no doubt the program is in a good spot, but at the same time, while Minnesota is competitive against the bottom of the Big Ten and the mid-tier teams in the Big Ten, every time they face one of these higher end opponents, it does feel like Groundhog's Day every time. I mean, yes, they will have a game like last year against Penn State where they almost pull off the upset. They pull off upsets quite a bit. But against Iowa's, games like the Ohio State game and numerous others, it's hard for fans not to feel like that there is another level to be found here. And that, yeah, Minnesota's in a really good spot at winning 7, 8, 9 games with a bowl game every year. I don't blame anybody for hoping that there's more on. There is a chance for another level, especially because you saw what Indiana is doing. What Indiana is doing is hope to everybody in college football that, like, uh, even if you're not a traditional power, it doesn't take. Well, obviously it takes a lot, but it doesn't mean that there's no hope that you could one day, be competing for a national championship in today's game. So I do not blame Minnesota fans who are out there. Somebody put on our board, on our Inside the Gopher Net board, sorry, Inside Gophers Nation board yesterday. They don't want PJ fired, but when he leaves, they'll be okay with it. I think there's a lot of Minnesota fans that kind of feel that way. They'll take what PJ gives them for however long. Perhaps eventually a change is not the worst thing for the program. Now, again, we're not advocating for Minnesota fire PJ Fleck. They shouldn't. He's one of the best coaches in program history. He has brought this program to be in a really, really good team in the Big Ten. But it does feel at the same time that after that win against Iowa, what felt like a narrow margin between the two programs has grown to be much bigger.
Yeah, and I mean, when that Arkansas report came out, there were a lot of comments saying, "Oh, it's a lateral move. Like, why would he do that? All this stuff." But if it's a job of that level, I agree with you. I think a lot of Gophers fans would almost appreciate it to an extent, saying how I don't think anyone would argue that he would be leaving the program in a better place than he found it. But for the same extent, it's just the losses against Iowa have to mean something, and that you just can't keep running them up because even in that 2019 season, they beat Penn State, and then the next game they go lose to Iowa, and they have Wisconsin on the last game of the year, and if they win that game, they go to the Big Ten championship. They lose that game, and it just in years in the past in 2021 or 2022, they started really well, and then they lost to Purdue at home on homecoming,
Right.
and it's just there's moments just time after time where right when it seems like this team's kind of breaking through, they just kind of fall flat, kind of how what we were talking about before,
Yeah.
and that has to count for something because it's you're leaning so much on that 2019 season where you're like, oh, he has proof of concept that it does work, but that you need another proof of concept within like a 5-year window that's a possibility because the last few years makes it seem like it might not be.
Yeah. And I know some people may think this is kind of a ridiculous conversation to have at this point, but I think when you look around the trends of college football and the way coaching decisions are made in today's game, it's a very realistic conversation to have that, again, not advocating for PJ Fleck to get fired, not advocating that PJ Fleck should leave the program, but these are the type of games and you look at kind of the bigger picture of this, where they've been blown out of the road twice this year. They lost to Cal in another game, and even in their wins, they haven't felt overly good. It's, I think, a fair conversation to have that. What is the future of this program under PJ Fleck? What does the administration hope is the future of the program going forward? And in general, has the program kind of reached a peak or plateau with Fleck and what the future may hold? Now, overall, we'll have many more weeks to talk about that. Let's talk about this game a little bit. We talked about them coming out flat early on, um, 17 nothing the hole in the first quarter. The pick six was the dagger of the game. But, we talked about the keys to the victory in this game. I think they did the exact opposite of every single key to victory we said. They got demolished in the trenches. The Pro Football Focus grades were, I thought, pretty good they were much better than I expected them. I expected them to be, I should say. The offensive line, they may not have given up a ton of negative yard rushes yesterday, but they were getting zero push up front. It was 1 yard and a pile of dust on most carries. The defensive line started bad in the run game, but definitely strengthened up as the game went on. The defense as a whole, I thought, played well after the first quarter, but at the end of the day, first quarter was bad. They gave up an opening drive touchdown really to start the game. They then give up a field goal on the second drive, and then there's the pick six, and that's the game right there. But ultimately, I think the conversation is just the offense here. The offensive line, after a really good performance against Nebraska, reverted back to all the bad habits that they showed in the first 7 games of the season, and that's the book on the offensive line the last 2.5 years. It's the Golden Gophers are not the Minnesota Moving Company in the trenches the last 2.5 years for the most part. They will have games. They were like Nebraska. They have big games, but it feels like when they do have success on the ground, a la rushing for over 100 yards, um, it feels like it's more because of Darius Taylor or the running backs than it is because of what the offensive line is doing. The offensive line has just legitimately been mediocre at best for the last 2.5 years. And if it continues this way going towards the end of the season, I mean, that is something that PJ Fleck has to look really, really closely at going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not gonna call for anyone's job, but, like, when
Right.
I say ramifications on Twitter, that's kinda what I mean, like, the offensive line's clearly not working, whatever strategy against Iowa, it's clearly not working, and I mean, what's really been concerning, I think, is the slow starts too over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
It was an issue last year at the start of the year. They kinda got better as the year went on, but oddly enough, the only time they've scored first against a power conference opponent this year was against the number one team in the country on the road. And it just kind of that first drive, it just right away. Like I agree with you that defense kind of played well, but it's drive number one, and
Yep.
then that other one in the second quarter that ended with Mark Gronowski having that touchdown throw in the back of the end zone.
Yeah.
Those seem like two of the biggest moments for the defense to come up with a stop, and they didn't, and it just seems like the moment's too big sometimes with this team,
Mm-hmm.
and again, we talk about trends, and if you stack up all the games, the Nebraska game seems more like an anomaly than a trend. We'll see how they come out this week against Michigan State, but there's just a lot of concerning things, and kind of what we've been talking about with the resources and the vision of the program. The Gophers have had a new defensive coordinator 3 years in a row now with Joe Rossi going to Michigan State and then Heatherman going to Miami and now Danny Collins. And Collins is had an up and down year. The defense wasn't the reason they lost this game, but
No.
for a coach to do that every year becomes tiresome because you get in a rhythm like they did with Corey Etherman at the end of the year, and their defense was looking great, and then you just kind of have to restart. And I feel like that's kind of been the vibe of this season.
Yeah, and on one and again, this is why even despite this type of loss, PJ is going to be a name that pops up in the portal because I legitimately think there are programs out there who want a coach like PJ because what he's done in Minnesota overall has been great. He's a great program builder, a great culture setter, and he's made great hires on the defense side of the ball, 3 straight hires in a row. Yeah, Joe Rossi's last season in Minnesota was not a great one. His defenses in Michigan at Michigan State have not been great, but nonetheless, he has had great defenses, all 3 defensive coordinators, and that's really hard to get right every single time. And he put a lot of faith in Danny Collins. And I don't think Danny Collins has been elite by any standards, but it's also been hard to judge this defense to a degree because the offense is so anemic at times and puts the defense in bad situations. I think a lot of the struggles yesterday, even though the defense forced after it was 24 nothing, which I know whoop de do 24 nothing average for 24 nothing whoop de do. But it would have been very easy for the defense just to quit after they gave up that pass and touchdown. But no, they after that they forced 5 punts, gave up a field goal, and gave up a touchdown, which was on short field. But this defense puts the offense in tough situations a lot of times because they have a lot of 3 and outs, or give up for poor field positioning. But when and I think some of the defensive issues this year is more players at the end of the day have to execute. I mean, the sophomore slump for Coy Parrish is the real thing on the defensive side of the
Yeah,
ball. You can't account for your star safety just to kind of take that big of a step back in year 2. We knew the cornerback room was going to be iffy. We knew there was questions with the linebackers. The defensive line, I know people haven't loved at times, but I thought the defensive line for the most part this season has played pretty well.
I
Uh,
agree.
Outside of a few games here, obviously the Purdue game against the run was bad, but sack wise and pressure wise, this has been one of the better defensive lines in the Big Ten. So I think Danny Collins has done a pretty good job this year, and a lot of it I don't think is play calling or scheme. I think it's execution. Now that's obviously a coaching issue at the same time, but yeah, definitely a lot of concerns. The one thing about the defense though is they have had slow starts as well this season. And that first drive against Iowa, whoever wins that drive it's a tone setter. If
Totally agree. Totally
Minnesota
agree.
comes out and forces a 3 and out, that gets Minnesota pumped up right away. Maybe it's a different game. But Iowa came out in that first drive and just moved the ball swiftly down the field with little resistance. And I think the Hawkeyes knew they had the Gophers beat there, right there.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, and that's why the slow starts are kind of a concerning trend because PJ Fleck is known nationally as like a good motivator and someone that raises the recruiting floor of a program, and he has been criticized for his in-game coaching, but and that's why this result was just so surprising because you have to be motivated, you have to be prepared for this game, and they just weren't.
100% agree. And yeah, if they're going to finish the season off strong, they have to get out to fast starts going forward. Talk about the offense. We have to talk about Drake Lindsay. First time all year that he looked like a freshman quarterback out there. The final stat line outside of the interceptions, and again, I can hear people saying, "Yeah, well, yeah, take away the 3 bad plays." Yeah, great. Without a doubt, a bad day for him. But 16 for 28, you'll take that most days. His decision making for the most part was fine, but his accuracy after the pick 6 was up and down throughout the rest of the day. And when he did make bad decisions, they were really, really bad decisions. I mean, the pick 6 was a play that we talked about Phil Parker, disguising defenses and throwing things out at Drake Lindsay to confuse him. They confused him right there. I still think that's a that's something he has to see as the play is progressing, and he just totally missed the corner there. Ludmer is I think his name.
Yeah.
He totally missed him on that play because if he sees Ludmer going towards that side of the field, I think it was Jamison Gears has 101 and is one-on-one with the safety down the middle of the field and is still 10 yards or so in front of the safety. If he makes a strong pass, Jamison Gears could have a first down and much more on that play, but he forces the throw to the side of the field. It's thrown into double coverage and intercepted. But the really bad one was the second interception, the first one in the second half, where he just chucks it downfield to Jamison Gears, and it's picked off deep in Minnesota territory. But that's a bad throw and one that he cannot make in that situation. The game was already over, but if the Gophers wanted any chance to do anything, they had to come out and score on that first drive. And if the interception for the pick six or the punt return wasn't the dagger, that was certainly a dagger. But yeah, just a poor day for Drake Lindsay.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of what you get when you start a redshirt freshman. There's going to be one game where they look inexperienced,
Yep.
and I think anyone who's off the Drake Lindsay train is wrong. I'm not
Right.
selling my stock anytime soon. I just when you're a 20-year-old quarterback in a first-year starter, you're going to have games where it just doesn't click, and
Yep.
I don't he just might have slept on the wrong side of the bed or what he was in a 17-0 hole before he blinked, which is quite the thing to put on a first year starting QB's plate.
Yeah.
And I just think it was just one of those games. He played very poorly. He had 7 games before that where he looked like a good quarterback.
Yeah.
I just think you just take it what it is. He played bad. Bad games are the easiest way to learn, and I think he's going to learn a lot from this. And I still think he's a bright future as a quarterback in the power conference level.
Yeah. I think perhaps after the 10-0 hole, he got in early. He maybe felt the pressure of it being a rivalry game, felt the pressure of playing in Kinnick. Uh, and maybe it was just trying to do too much. And then the pick six happened, and he was clearly rattled, which I think was the first time we saw him rattled all season. And that's unless I'm forgetting, that's the first pick six of his career too. And
Yeah.
I think they know it. Obviously, you're still fighting. You still think you have a chance, but they know once they go down 17-0 there that it's a tall task to climb out of this hole, especially against this Iowa defense. It was a big question if they were going to score 17 points in the game. Now you have to score at least 17 to get this to overtime and hope your defense is perfect the rest of the way. So I think he was just rattled. He wasn't even rattled at Ohio State, but you look at Ohio State. He started that game off hot, and he didn't really have any backbreaking errors in that game that would have rattled him. And plus, that's a rivalry game. Yes, Ohio State fans are rowdy, but you add the rivalry game aspect to that at Kinnick Stadium, and it adds a lot more pressure. But yeah, I think it's going to be a good learning experience for him, and we'll see how he bounces back this upcoming week. This is his really first true bad performance. Does he let it does he let it be a game that, you know, is on his shoulders all week? He can't shake it and, it's 2 bad games in a row? Or does he learn from it, shake it off, and come out and have maybe his best game against Michigan State? Because that's a Michigan State team that the Gophers could very well beat next week handedly. It's not a very good Spartans team. And if they're going to do that, they need Drake to have a big game. So I think that's one of the more intriguing aspects coming out of this game and going into next week is just how does Drake rebound from that type of performance overall. And the one thing I will say, obviously, it is Iowa, so throwing the deep ball is not easy. But for as good as this passing game has been at times this year, they are really struggling this year in hitting those deep passes. Drake, after this weekend, is 7 for 32, 277 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. He's fantastic in the short game. He's pretty good in the intermediate game. But it's also tough to win games against these type of opponents if you cannot hit those downfield passes once or twice in a game.
Yeah, I completely agree. PJ Fleck, the reason he's still a coach of the Gophers is he routinely responds from these moments, and that's how he's raised the floor of this program, and it's a great opportunity to do it this week against Michigan State.
Absolutely. The other thing I want to quickly talk about, and credit to you for bringing this up in the preview. Tom Weston all season has been up and down. He's had some really good games, had some bad games. I think this was his. Well, he settled in a little bit as the game went on. It was a terrible day at the start for him, and to a degree, a sizable reason that this game snowballed the way it did for the Gophers.
Yeah, it's just when you start in such a big hole, it's hard to point towards special teams being a reason why it snowballed, but it certainly did. I forget exactly when the punt happened, but the one that he barely got past the 50, that was in the first half. It was just a couple of those moments where it just obviously the punt return too. They just couldn't get out of their own way, and it's hard to even point to anything positive in that game. And
Yeah.
it was a disaster, and the special teams did not help it.
Yeah. We said they can't punt the ball to Caden Weechgen in this game. We said that Iowa was going to try to get the ball in his hands as much as possible in this game. They did just that. And Caden obviously had that punt return for a touchdown, which really sent the game off the rails. But yeah, overall, I think, we nobody wanted to hear too much about this game overall, just because everybody saw what happened. It was a non-competitive game. The Gophers from the jump were out of it, and they weren't physical enough. They weren't ready for this game. And at the end of the day, that is on PJ Fleck. And when you are measured by 2 games every season, I think it's 100% fair to discuss what the future looks like, because the Gophers definitely seem to be trending the wrong way when it comes to playing teams like Iowa. And they have a chance to rebound after this game. They could still finish 8-4, but if they finish 8-4, that fourth loss to Oregon needs to be competitive, or those 8 wins are going to feel pretty empty. And I mean, outside of Nebraska, you can make the argument if the Gophers do finish 8-4, they only beat one truly good team this season. I think if they go 8-4 and at least are not competitive against Oregon, a lot of Gophers fans are going to be feeling quite empty about the season.
Totally agree. And I guess only time will tell. It'll be an interesting end of the year.
Absolutely. All right. Any final thought? I mean, any final thoughts on the Gophers coming out of this game? You still feel 7-5, 8-4 is on the table with what's left?
Yeah, I mean, at the start of this Iowa and Nebraska stretch, I think most Gophers fans realistically knew that a split was best case scenario for
Yeah.
2 games, that they were going to be an underdog of more than 7 points. But it's just the way it happened against Iowa,
Yeah.
and that raises some alarms. But yeah, I mean, the Northwestern game will be interesting because we saw them be very competitive against Nebraska last week. But
Still don't know if Nebraska's good. That's the problem.
yeah, I'm fully expecting, and with the way that things have looked under PJ Fleck, I could just see a scenario where they come out and dominate Michigan State, and then you get a bye week, and then you regroup, and then it'll be interesting. But 7-5, 8-4, it was what most fans expected before the year. The way it's looked is one thing, and like you mentioned, they could go 7-5 and have one win over a team that's in a bowl game, which would be a pretty empty year, like you said. So it'll be interesting.
Sorry, Hassan. Minnesota is about a 5.5 point favorite right now over Michigan State for next week, depending on where you look. That's a 2:30 p.m. kickoff next Saturday at Huntington Bank Stadium. Games on Big Ten Network. And this is the stat that, people are going to keep saying coming to this game, and kind of one that I think the Gophers may be compared to after the result. 5 Big Ten games for Michigan State this year, 5 losses by 10+ points. So, this is a team that has been not dominated, but has been beat handily each of these first 5 Big Ten games, including UCLA and Nebraska. I think the Gophers need to come out on next Saturday and show that, they're not going to bury their heads after that loss to Iowa, that they're going to use that loss to Iowa as motivation and finish the season strong here. But yeah, if they struggle next week against this Michigan State team, I think it would be another one that just continues to raise alarms.
Couldn't have said it any better. I think that's how it works.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to another episode of the Golden Gopher Hour podcast. My name is Dylan Callaghan-Croley. Once again, you can find me over at Gophers Nation of the On3 Network, covering everything Minnesota. We do have a special going on right now that you could join the Gophers Nation community for $1 your first week. So be sure to check that out. And then, Tony, where can they find you on the interwebs or on social media?
Yeah, the easiest way to find most of my stuff's on Twitter at Tony Liebert, and then all the written stuff over on Gophers on SI. But Twitter's best way to find it all.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to another episode of the Gonna Go for Hour, and we will be back at it later this week to preview that Michigan State game. And we'll talk to everybody soon. Have a good start to your new weeks, and we'll talk soon.